The next story you're about to hear is adapted from Evil Empire, my exposé of John Gilligan, his gang, and the murder of Veronica Guerin. The Untouchables describes the utter contempt and arrogance that had developed within the Gilligan Gang in the months leading up to Veronica's murder in 1996.
The video camera panned across paradise. Palm trees and exotic plants swayed in a mild breeze. In the background, the Caribbean glistened under a blue sky. The camera zoomed back from the breathtaking scenery, past magnificent flora and manicured lawns, to be replaced on the screen with John Gilligan's grinning, sunburned face. He lifted a glass of champagne to the camera in a toast.
"This is a lovely bleeding place for a wedding, what? It's fucking beautiful, it is,"
he declared in his thick Dublin brogue. It was March 1996, and the gang were living the high life on the island of San Lucia. John and Geraldine Gilligan had travelled to the exotic island 4,000 miles from rain-sodden Ireland for the wedding of Brian Meehan's sister Leslie to an electrical engineer with no connection to gangland. Meehan's parents, Kevin and Francis, and his siblings Brad and Vanessa were there. Peter Mitchell, Paul Ward, and 3 of the Walsh sisters, including Fiona and Sonia, who were girlfriends of Peter Mitchell and Brian Meehan, made up the party of 14. The group stayed at the Sandals luxury resort for a week, swilling champagne, snorting cocaine, eating fine food and lounging about the pool. The Gilligans had paid £7,000 in cash for the week, and Brian Meehan had paid for his family's holiday. It cost him almost £30,000. The cherished home movie recorded the idyllic wedding. Leslie was married in a gazebo overlooking the shimmering Caribbean. Brian Meehan was the best man. He and his father Kevin looked awkward, like nightclub bouncers in their black tuxedos.
"He looks great. I dressed him myself. Doesn't he look great? I got him out of all those rave clothes,"
Gilligan commented on his lieutenant's attire. Peter Mitchell's unmistakable voice caused the staff handling the wedding ceremony to raise their eyebrows. Referring to Meehan, he says,
"I have to zoom in on the bouncer, man. You'll get a job at home as a bouncer, you dirty fuck you."
The wedding party's vulgar, raucous behaviour seemed out of place on such a beautiful, peaceful island. Behind the din and rude jokes, the gentle rustling of the palm trees and waves lapping on the beach nearby provided the background music for the idyllic scene, bought and paid for on the proceeds of crime. Meehan was filmed signing the wedding register.
"I hope that's not a fucking statement for the fucking police,"
Mitchell shouts. Later, the camera recorded the fun around the swimming pool. Meehan and Peter Mitchell jumped into the pool with Paul Ward and began laughing and shouting for the camera. "This one's for Veronica Guerin." Meehan scoffed loudly amid cackles of laughter from everyone. "Crime doesn't pay," followed by more hoots of laughter. The crime reporter was never far from their drink and drug-soaked minds. Gilligan's brat pack joked with him about the impending assault charge. He was enjoying the jibes and laughed that he would win his case and never go back to prison again. In another camera shot, the wedding group sat around a hotel lounge drinking and singing songs. Gilligan sang part of the song "The Wild Rover" before forgetting the lines. Then Brad Meehan, Brian's drug-addicted criminal brother, began to sing an old country song. The lyrics could have been written with Gilligan and his henchmen in mind. "I've got everything a man could need. I've got dreams to dream, songs to sing in the morning. I've got a bed to hold my head, and I've got eyes to watch my woman. I've got everything a man could ever need." Gilligan clapped his approval at the song. He looked smug and confident in the bosom of his mob and family. Like a miniature Don Corleone, he was untouchable. But the Guerin problem was never far from his thoughts or those of his gang. She had rejected an offer of compensation and was determined to pursue an assault charge against him. Following the incident, Gilligan had hatched an incredible plan to finally sort out the mess. He planned to kidnap Gavin O'Reilly, the son of Tony O'Reilly, the multimillionaire proprietor of the independent group which owned the Sunday Independent. Their lackeys in the INLA, whom they had supplied with guns, drugs and money, and who had become their private little army, could be prevailed upon to help in the diabolical operation. Gavin O'Reilly, who was one of the company's directors, was to be abducted and taken to a safe house. Gilligan reckoned that it would show the newspaper executive that he meant business. The executive was to be threatened and terrorised, but not harmed. Before his release, he would be instructed to convince Veronica to drop the charges. If he did not, then the O'Reilly family would be hit again. He would be warned not to report the matter to the police. Gilligan discussed the idea with John Traynor, who convinced him that it wasn't a very wise course of action. Traynor was influenced by his own sense of self-preservation. Wearing his double agent hat, he even informed the detective in Serious Crime Squad of the plot. In October 1995, an intelligence report on the information was sent to the Crime and Security Branch at Garda headquarters. An armed surveillance squad was placed at a discreet distance around Gavin O'Reilly until the authorities were satisfied that the kidnapping plans were not going ahead. Gilligan's henchmen would have been more than willing to take part in what would be a very high-profile crime against one of the country's most influential families. They had no fear of the fallout from such an incident. The gang had become the most powerful in the Dublin underworld. The drugs empire was thriving. The distribution system organised by Charlie Bowden was working like a dream. Their Dutch suppliers were efficient and giving value for money. They had a formidable arsenal of firearms. No criminal or cop could cross them. They had all become dangerous men. They were supremely confident and cocky, and even sent postcards to the police signed "The Firm" from exotic holiday locations. San Lucia was a welcome break from the hassle of the drugs world for Brian Meehan, Mitchell and Ward. In the month before their well-deserved break, they had been involved in 2 incidents with underworld rivals in Dublin. The most dramatic was the attempted murder of Martin the Viper Foley. The Viper had become one of the gang's smallest customers, buying a kilo of hash most weeks from Charlie Bowden. He had been given the nickname the Viper by Martin Cahill in the early 1990s because the General suspected him of being a police informant. Foley, a former member of the General's gang, had also been a member of Gilligan's factory gang, but Traynor and Gilligan now hated him. Foley and Shave O'Hogan had been putting pressure on Traynor for money they reckoned they were owed for the sale of the Bite art collection. Traynor, a born coward, began to fear a hit from Foley and Hogan. Something had to be done about the Viper. At 6:55 p.m. on Thursday, February the 1st, 1996, Foley was ambushed near his home by Brian Meehan and Paul Ward. The 2 gangsters opened fire, peppering Foley's car with bullets. One of the bullets hit him in a finger. Another bullet hit him in the back as he ran through a nearby house. Foley's fitness told, though, and he managed to jump through a window in an upstairs bedroom, escaping his would-be assassins. A week before the trip to St. Lucia, Meehan and Mitchell were questioned about another shooting incident, this time involving a drug dealer who worked for a notorious criminal called Peter Joseph Judge, alias the Psycho. Judge from Finglas was one of the underworld's most feared killers, who had more than earned his chilling nickname. He had 2 former associates abducted, tortured and murdered in rows over drug shipments. One of his victims, William Jock Corbally, had been murdered and buried in an unmarked grave by Judge. Everyone in gangland feared the Psycho, that is, everyone except Gilligan's untouchables. On the night of February the 28th, 1996, Brian Meehan fired 2 shots outside a Northside pub as a warning to Judge's dealer. He had begun selling drugs in the North Inner City area, which Mitchell considered to be his turf. The encroachment on Fatso's territory rekindled an old dispute. 2 years earlier, the dealer had shot Fatso in the same pub, causing him minor injuries. Peace was restored on that first occasion, when the dealer agreed to pay Mitchell substantial compensation. The incident was never reported to the police. Following the second shooting, officers at Store Street Station were tipped off that PJ Judge and the dealer were planning to murder Meehan. The 2 criminals had obtained a high-powered motorbike and were carrying sawn-off shotguns. Judge had been cruising the area looking for Meehan. To avert a bloodbath, detectives raided the home of the dealer as well as those of Judge, Meehan and Mitchell, searching for weapons. Nothing was found. The Hoods were left under no illusion that the police had found out about their feud. They decided to postpone straightening out the situation. St. Lucia for them was a well-deserved break. When they returned to Ireland, the violence was to continue. On April the 1st, Johnny Redden, a drug dealer and underworld heavy, was sitting in the Blue Lion pub in Parnell Street in the city centre. The 42-year-old was then facing a charge of causing grievous bodily harm leading to the death of a teenager, Sean McNeil, in a North City nightclub. Redden was also an associate of Paul Ward and sold drugs for the Gilligan Gang. As he sipped a pint at the counter, a man wearing a peaked cap walked up to Redden and produced a pistol. "Here, Johnny, take it out of that," he said, and then shot him once in the head. The gunman ordered the other customers to shut up and lie on the floor. He ran out the door and got away in a motorbike. Following the murder of Veronica Guerin, the Lucan investigation team obtained intelligence which led them to believe that a member of the Gilligan Gang was responsible for the Redden hit. Underworld sources told officers that Paul Ward in particular was very annoyed with other gang members about it. Although investigating officers recommended that a known criminal be taken in, no one was ever charged with the offence. As a result of intelligence gleaned during the Guerin investigation, the same sources believed that 2 members of the gang also gunned down Cork criminal Michael Crinnion in the spring of 1995. It has been claimed that Paul Ward and Brian Meehan did the hit as a favour to a Cork gang who are feuding with Crinnion's gang. They pointed out that in the cases of the Crinnion and Shanahan murders and the Foley shooting, the involvement of Gilligan's gang was not known until the Guerin investigation, the most wide-ranging nationwide trawl ever carried out into gangland. The gang members were growing ever more arrogant. Instead of keeping their heads down, they were openly flouting their criminal success. On one occasion, Gilligan and his brat pack were out on the town in an upmarket hotel on the south side. The Hoods regularly hired a large room for parties in the hotel. These were basically orgies of sex, drink and drugs with prostitutes hired for the event. Gilligan and his pals were downstairs drinking at the bar. As usual, they were boisterous, aggressive and flashing money about. A detective walked into the bar for a drink. He had a bulge under his jacket, and Meehan began abusing him for carrying his gun. The policeman ignored the jibes and ordered a beer. As his glass stood on the counter, Gilligan took off his expensive gold Rolex watch and slid it in the direction of the cop. It clanged as it collided with the glass. The detective looked down at the watch and said nothing. Gilligan shouted at him,
"Here, take the fucking thing. That's worth more than you'll earn in a year."
His brat pack cackled with laughter. The detective shoved the watch back up the counter and left. 2 days after the Redden murder, Brian Meehan was arrested in the early hours of the morning by uniformed officers from the Bridewell Garda station. He had been at the Hood's funeral that day and had been drinking. He was in a belligerent mood when the cops stopped to talk to him on the street. Gardaí are entitled to stop and search known criminals under the Misuse of Drugs Act. It was and is a statute regularly used for the purpose of gleaning intelligence. The officers took Meehan to the station to be searched for drugs. On the way, Meehan taunted a female officer, calling her a lesbian and telling her, "You fancy my arse." When Garda Joe O'Connor told him to behave himself, Meehan threatened him. "I'll get you, your wife and your family. You think you're a big man now, but you won't be so big the next time I meet you with a balaclava." Once at the station, Meehan was taken to a custody room for a strip search. In front of Garda O'Connor, Meehan began handling his penis and asked the astonished officer, "Do you like men with big cocks?" Meehan then began masturbating and turned around, grabbing his buttocks and exposing his anus. "Maybe you fancy me arse instead?" Meehan turned around and resumed masturbating. "Do you want the repeat performance?" he asked before being told to put his clothes back on. Gardaí found over £600 in cash in Meehan's pockets, which they seized for forensic examination. Meehan told the officer to keep it. "Yous fuckers need it more than I do. Give it to the Police Benevolent Fund. Yous are a bunch of fucking idiots working and paying tax. I earn more in a week than you earn in a month," he sneered at them. Then he turned his attention on the desk sergeant and called him a shite bucket. He was charged with causing a breach of the peace and indecent behaviour. Meehan couldn't have cared less. Sometime in March, Gilligan and Meehan were contacted by an underworld associate to help organise the springing of Thomas Bomber Clark from a prison van. Bomber Clark was a ruthless, violent criminal who had been involved in serious crime from an early age. He specialised in armed robbery and was an old friend of Meehan and Ward. He'd also served time in prison with Gilligan. At 27 years of age, he'd notched up 22 convictions in Ireland. In 1987, he'd been given 5 and 7 year sentences for 2 armed robberies. When in January 1993 he was due to appear in the Dublin Circuit Court on another robbery charge, Clark fled to England. He lived in Leeds and continued to rob banks. On March the 20th, 1994, Clark was convicted at Leeds Crown Court on 3 counts of armed robbery and sentenced to 9 years. In October 1995, he escaped from prison and returned to Ireland. In December he was tracked down and arrested in County Kerry. He was initially questioned about the murder of Christy Delaney, a former member of Gilligan's factory gang, but was convicted on the outstanding robbery charge and sentenced to 5 years of imprisonment. While in custody, he was charged with another building society heist and had to make a number of appearances at remand hearings in the district court. Gilligan and his gang had no problem doing Bomber a favour. After all, they were untouchable, and a daring act would raise respect for them in criminal quarters. On April 25th, Clark was being transported for a remand hearing. Brian Meehan, Paul Ward and another criminal from Clondalkin planned to spring him on the way to court. Peter Mitchell was to provide a backup car for Clark's getaway. A Garda driver and 4 prison officers accompanied Clark in the prison van from Portlaoise. As it drove past the village of Rathcoole on its way to Dublin, the 3 hoods followed the van in a stolen 5 Series BMW. As the van approached the junction of the Naas Road and Boot Road at Clondalkin, the gang struck. This was the same location where Veronica Guerin would be shot 2 months later. The BMW suddenly drove into the van's path, blocking a possible escape. 2 men jumped out of the car and ran to the van. One had bolt cutters and the other a handgun. While his partner broke the van window, the gunman ordered the prison officers to open Clark's cuffs. Bomber Clark climbed out through the broken window and jumped into the car. The escapees sped off. As a major manhunt began, Clark was brought to the apartment owned by Gilligan's mistress, Carol Rooney, near Selbridge in County Kildare. Within days, Gilligan had Clark smuggled out of the country on a container truck to Holland. There he was given a safe house by Johnny Wildhagen, a henchman of notorious international guns and drugs trafficker Simon Rahman. Gilligan and Meehan sprang Clark to prove to the rest of the underworld that they could do whatever they liked. It was also speculated that, in return for their kindness, Clark was to murder George the Penguin Mitchell. Mitchell was also an important player in the international drugs market, although a lot more discreet than Gilligan and his Neanderthals. If the Penguin was out of the way, the Gilligan Gang could take over his substantial slice of the action, dramatically increasing the size of their own operation. Gilligan was still trying to impress his Dutch counterparts, and he offered Clark services as a hitman. However, Bomber Clark was soon arrested by Dutch police on suspicion of staking out houses for the purpose of carrying out burglaries. He was caught loitering near the home of one of Rahman's underworld rivals. In April 1997, Clark pleaded guilty to armed robbery charges and was sentenced. When he's released in 2007, Clark will be extradited back to Britain to serve the rest of the prison sentence he escaped in 1995. In the meantime, business was brisk for Gilligan and the money was flowing in so fast that the gangsters could barely cope. In the first 4 months of 1996, up to the time of the springing of Clark, the gang imported 3,247 kilos of hash. The figure is based on detailed analysis of shipping records conducted by the Lucan investigation team. Gilligan and Trainor's cut was estimated at £2.5 million, while the 5 gang members each earned £130,000. The gang also became the biggest single supplier of drugs to Northern Ireland. A young Newry-based drug dealer called Brendan Speedy Fegan began buying up to 100 kilos per week from Meehan and the gang. Fegan supplied Loyalist and Republican paramilitary gangs with ecstasy, cocaine and hash. As the operation grew more powerful, the gang needed to cover its tracks. They had so much money that they could buy anything: guns, drugs, women, cars, houses and holidays. By the middle of 1996, they had also bought a cop. John Buffalo O'Neill was 31 years old when he met Paul Hippo Ward and was recruited as an agent for the Gilligan Gang. Having a man on the inside would be of immense use in developing the evil empire. O'Neill from Ballyfermot in Dublin had known Paul Ward and Meehan growing up. Unlike them, he had opted for a life on the other side of the thin blue line and joined the Garda Síochána in November 1985. The married father of 3 had spent his career as a uniformed officer based in Tala and Crumlin. A keen GAA football player, non-drinker and non-smoker, he was considered by some to be an enthusiastic policeman with an impressive arrest record. To others in the force and in the criminal community, his enthusiasm was rather excessive. Sadly, John O'Neill, hero cop, had a weakness which would destroy all of the respect he had earned. Friends and former colleagues recalled how O'Neill had always wanted to give his family everything that he hadn't had growing up in deprived circumstances. O'Neill bought a nice home for his family and lavishly furnished it. He extravagantly splashed out money, buying a 4-wheel drive Jeep for himself and a brand new car for his wife's birthday. He bought his children the most expensive toys that money could buy, including small motorbikes for his sons. But it was all done on a Garda's basic wages. O'Neill soon found himself in debt to the tune of £100,000. Apart from a mortgage, he also had 4 credit union loans. Buffalo had worked as a bouncer for a criminal associate of Ward's, who used the cover of a nightclub manager. O'Neill was desperate for cash and approached the manager to ask him if he knew anyone who could loan him money. The manager was delighted to oblige and contacted Hippo Ward. In December 1995, O'Neill took £1,500 in cash from Ward in the car park of the Red Cow public house on the western edge of Dublin. Ward told his new friend that he might be wanted to help sort out the odd summons or warrant. Shortly before Christmas, Ward gave O'Neill another £1,000 in the car park of another pub. In January 1996, Ward asked O'Neill to pull 2 summonses for a criminal friend of his from Drimna by taking them out of the list for hearing in court. O'Neill had the documents taken from the list. In May, O'Neill was in need of more cash. This time Ward paid him £2,000 for pulling 2 arrest warrants for an associate of the gang. O'Neill took the warrants from his station and showed them to Hippo, who paid him another £500. A short time later, he pulled 2 arrest warrants for another gang associate from Ronanstown. This time he received £2,000 for the effort. Ward also arranged for the Buffalo to find 3 kilos of cannabis to make him look good with his bosses. He later had summonses for motoring offences pulled for Paul Ward, Vanessa Meehan and Brian Meehan. O'Neill was getting in above his head and out of control. Ward and the other members of the gang liked to brag that they had now bought their very own policeman. Gilligan liked the idea. A bent cop was a valuable asset for a drugs gang. Early in 1996, Gilligan and Traynor discussed Traynor's relationship with a detective in the Serious Crime Squad. Traynor claimed that the cop was working for him, although the policeman had never asked nor taken any money from Traynor. Traynor neglected to tell his boss that he'd been giving the cop information about the underworld. The 2 hoodlums agreed that they should try to put the detective on the payroll. Traynor reckoned that the officer was vulnerable at the time because he had been experiencing personal difficulties. During one of their frequent meetings, the coach put his dodgy proposition to the detective. He and Gilligan were prepared to give him £250,000 in cash if he would leave the Gardaí and begin working as the gang's security advisor. Although such an offer was tempting, the detective turned it down. Traynor had miscalculated the situation. What he didn't know was that the mild-mannered and easygoing policeman had been passing on every piece of information he had picked up from the con man to his own intelligence section. He'd also compiled a first major dossier outlining the activities of the Gilligan Gang and recommended that action be taken. It would be too little, too late.